you describe 4 class trajectories in your book? Can you define these?
Yes, so I was looking for terms that were accurate descriptions of the differences in people's life experience depending on the class they were born into and the class they're in as adults, and that weren't demeaning in any way, that were respectful, so respectful and accurate. So I break people by a big class divide that's roughly the difference between having a 4-year college degree or not. So a lot of the activists that I observed had high school education or less, and their parents also had high school education, worked wage jobs, closely supervised jobs, or had hands-on small businesses. And they also, as adults, were in those kind of jobs. And so that refer roughly to that range as the working class range. Some of them were in actual poverty, some were lower middle class, but there's a big working class range. On the other side of the class divide is people they and their parents both have 4-year degrees or more education and tended to work jobs with more autonomy, more security, sometimes more income, professional managerial jobs. So I refer to that as the professional range. It goes from lower professional middle class, upper middle class, couple owning class people. So that's the two halves. Often I am in the book making a comparison between the two sides of the class divide. But of course, many people don't stay at the same class level as they grew up. So the upwardly mobile people who are the first generation to go to college, I call straddlers. And some of the straddlers had gone on to professional managerial careers, home ownership, etc. I call them the assimilated straddlers. Some had veered off that career track after college. I call them the unassimilated straddlers. So, which turned out to be a really big difference in behavior and attitudes between those two sets of straddlers. Then, of course, a lot of people go downwardly mobile. They don't replicate the class advantages that their family of origin had. So people can be involuntarily downwardly mobile for a lot of different reasons, disabilities and war, post-traumatic stress, and many, many things happen, including just bad economies, to have people become long-term involuntarily downwardly mobile. So I didn't look at them very much. They're very varied. But what there were a lot of, because I was looking at social justice groups, was voluntarily downwardly mobile people. So this is people, their parents were college-educated professionals. They also went to college, and then they made choices, either for environmental reasons, to go off the grid, lower their carbon footprint, or to free up their time for activism or art or something. They're either working in a coffee shop or squatting and dumpster diving, but they're at basically a poverty level income or working class level income now and not working full time. So that's, of course, a much more common class trajectory among left of center activists than in the general population. But that's the 4-way comparison I'm making, is the lifelong in the working class range, lifelong in the professional range, upwardly mobile straddlers, and voluntarily downwardly mobile.
What are some of the strengths that each class would bring to the task of community organizing?
Well, what I discovered was that so many groups are pretty much all from the same class, that just like we have social segregation by class as well as race in our wider society, people organize through their existing social networks, and they end up with a majority of people of one class. And what that does is it limits the solutions that they have to common problems that come up in all voluntary groups. I discovered the problems are the same, no matter what the movement tradition, no matter what the class or other, race or other differences of the group. But the solutions are very different. So one thing is just, if you're unaware of other class cultures, you have fewer tools in your toolkit for solving activist group problems. The other thing, of course, is that is more like classism, is that there's a tendency to believe, for class-privileged people to believe that their ways are superior. And so they're inadvertently disrespecting the approaches of working class and poor activists, overlooking their suggestions, and just assuming that their way of doing things is the right way. I found this, there's a lot of conflicts between over group process, where there's much more of an belief that leadership is a bad thing. That's much, much more common among college-educated activists, and especially more radical politics, voluntarily downwardly mobile, unassimilated straddlers. There's a belief that no one should be a leader, and so if there is inequality of power, clout, or decision-making in the group, that's something to work against. And pretty much any amount of time looking inward at the dynamics of the group seems worthwhile to some of the college-educated activists. Not, it's like a different world. You go into community organizing and labor groups. First of all, there is an expectation that, for example, meetings are going to be chaired by the leader or leaders regularly, that as opposed to being rotated, and that accountable leadership by people who act on behalf of the community's interests, is a good thing. In fact, the basis of loyalty to the group in the working class groups often was loyalty to a leader, and which doesn't mean that it's not that stereotype of Lipset said. Basically, the authoritarian personality made working class people sound like sheep who'll just follow any fascist dictator. That's not at all what I found, so I just want to debunk that stereotype. There was an active process by the working class activists of assessing was a leader trustworthy, were people's walk matching their talk, and if the leader turns out to be unaccountable, actually quitting is seen as the right thing to do, that you don't stay. So it's a very active process, but the building of trust, the bonds being like a spokes of a wheel, that everyone's got this bond to a person or few people in the center. You just, which I think has a lot of strengths, as well as downsides, of course, if there's unaccountable or corrupt leaders. But I think that there's a strength to when the primary bond are among people. That is a strength in the group that often isn't there in the college-educated majority group. I think there's a fragility. If the primary loyalty is to an ideal or an issue or an ideology, then if people disagree with each other, the group can break up over that. And the locus of the commitment is inside the individual. So organizing college-educated activists is a little like herding cats. Somebody made a joke and said it's a little like herding lions. But on the other hand, there is that portable commitment to a cause that gets carried from group to group, and to over-rely on the bonds among the people or with the leader, then if the people stop getting along or someone leaves, a working class majority group can break up over that. So this is an example, one of many, where I say the strongest is going to be when you can tap the strengths of all class cultures. So if you can have both strengthen the loyalty among the people, the individuals, whether they agree or they don't agree, they're bonded to each other, and strengthen the commitment that even if the people aren't going to get along, you're going to keep your eyes on the prize and keep that commitment to the political ideal. That will be the strongest.
What are some of the weaknesses associated with activist groups dominated by one class?
I think that one would be for the common problem of how do you, when you have low turnout, that's one of the most universal of group problems, how do you deal with that? How do you get more of your membership to turn out and recruit more new people? It was almost a freakishly strong correlation between activist class and how they answered that question in interviews, and also what they talked about while they were sitting there in the half-empty room waiting for the other people to turn up. So the most common answer when asked, how would you get more people to turn out to your meetings, the most common answer from working class people was food. So better food, advertise the food, entertainment, and other perks of membership. Of course, unions have that built in, but community organizing groups. Well, let's say if you come to the meeting, you get first dibs at taking the food from the food pantry, or the clothes from the free clothes bin, or it could be a short-term strategy. We're going to win something that's really going to make a difference in your life, and we can win it in the next couple months if you come out. Those approaches were not mentioned at all at the beginning of while they're waiting for people to come at the college-educated majority meetings. Where is everybody? That perennial conversation. That wasn't what was talked about. And when they were asked in interviews, what would you do to get more people to come out? Not one person said food. And instead, they talked about the match between the ideas and the ideologies of the potential constituencies and of the messaging of the group. All the groups talked politics, but that particular way tended to be mostly second-generation college-educated people talking about, well, maybe our ideology is too radical for this group. Maybe if we switch the message to this, so-and-so would be more interested, or this so-and-so cares about this sub-issue, if we did a campaign on that you adjust the messaging and the focus to get more people. Again, no working class or poor people said that when they were asked. It doesn't mean they don't do it, but when they were asked in interviews, they didn't say that. So this, again, is an example of how just awareness of how another class culture does things. So there would be, I saw some college-educated majority groups sitting in a mostly empty room at 6:30 at night, no food at all, saying, where is everybody? What can we do to get them to turn out? I thought they'd come. Why can't we get more people to turn out? If those folks had any exposure to community organizing or labor organizing, any kind of working class majority social justice group, they would see how food is being used and other inherent pleasures of coming to the meeting, like entertainment, how that's being used to get people in the door, and then the commitment to the group and its issues can evolve from there.
You talk a bit about the Occupy movement in your book. Can you talk about how class culture played a role in that?
To give the Occupy movement credit, it was, or is, to the extent it still exists, mixed class in many parts of the country. It did bring some people of different classes together, but in terms of who predominated, it was the college-educated, lower professional, and voluntarily downwardly mobile people. In every place where I'm aware of it, that's who kind of ran the show. I have a story to tell that's not in my book, but that I got to hear told by 4 people at a conference panel who had organized May Day in New York City in 2012. So New York has always had a big march and rally for International Workers' Day, and everyone was excited in 2012 because, of course, the Occupy Wall Street, the flagship occupation of the Occupy movement, had started in November and was a few months old at that point. There's going to be a big new constituency. It's going to be huge this year. So they started having meetings 3-4 months before May Day, and it was the same groups that had always done it: immigrant rights groups, unions representing low-wage service workers and neighborhood and community groups at these meetings. And then the people who came from the Occupy Wall Street committee were white, young, college-educated, second-generation college-educated people. So I heard this person from the immigrant rights group say, it was really rough. The planning process was really rough. You'll never believe what we argued about. We argued so much, and I had been doing this research, so I wrote on my notebook, group process, and I nudged my friend. I said, she's going to say they argued about group process. She said, you'll never believe we kept arguing about group process. So they had always had a simple majority rules, straightforward, representative democracy system for this coalition that put on this event. But the Occupy Wall Street people were like, no, everything has to be decided by consensus, where anyone can block, and everything has to go back to the whole groups. And there can't be any power differences. It has to be a horizontal process. And the people from the other groups were like, we can't stay all night. We have to get home. We have kids to put to bed. We have to get up for work. In the morning, we can't meet every night. But apparently, at least somebody said, this is the way it is because this is our only thing that we have agreed to, and it's that or we walk. And it's this huge constituency. There's thousands of people who will potentially come out if it's an Occupy Wall Street event. So they slogged their way through and had a miserable time of it. And it was big, but and they still are speaking to each other. So I guess that's a success of cross-class organizing. But to me, the difference between just a class culture difference and classism is that insistence that your way is better. That historically, right back from the Bohemian days and the hippie days, that the ideal of being the change you want to see, doing things in a very alternative counterculture way, and promoting egalitarian participatory group process has been carried for the last half century in the U.S., not everywhere in the world, but has been carried by people from elite class backgrounds. So hippies, beatniks, that was disproportionately where they came from. That's where the anarchist activists disproportionately come from now. And it's fine to be different, and it's fine to have those ideals and put forward, this is the way we like to do it. But once you start saying to people who have less class privilege than yourself, our way is the only way, we're going to impose it, or our way is the morally superior way, there's a lot of sort of classism in the form of greener than thou or more egalitarian than thou. And I think this is just the same old classism in a new package. So, I think they should have come in with those as suggestions.
Why is class diversity a neglected topic among community organizers?
Of course, we are in a society that talks much less than many other countries in the world about class. We pride ourselves on being a classless society, which obviously we are not. But I think there's other reasons, too. The kinds of social justice groups that I was looking at, there's 25 groups in 5 states. They mostly, whatever their movement tradition, they had done some looking at race and gender dynamics, diversity within their group. At a minimum, a little guilty, chastising themselves for not having more diversity, but some of them had done real hard work on those kinds of diversity. And I think because of 40 years of identity politics, we have some common language for the different gender and race groups. We have some common ways of dealing with it, and pretty much everybody's on the same page when you walk into a meeting of who's there by race and gender. The conversations about class, I know this through my work with the nonprofit Class Action, where we invite people to tell their class stories and get into class caucuses. The conversation on class has to start much more basic because we don't share any vocabulary. Two people might have identical experience and be calling it by two different labels. The term working class is kind of latent. It's not it's not used very much anymore, and people are pretty confused even about who's in their group. I found that most people were guessing wrong about the class backgrounds. There are a lot of invisible working class and poor people in majority college-educated groups, and there's a lot of invisible, very privileged people because, and so everybody's like, oh yeah, we're all about the same here. And there's also posing, you get a little more status in some social justice groups by being associated with an oppressed identity. And so there were people posing or exaggerating their credentials as working class or poor. So the role of the poor person in an anti-poverty group can be played by a person of any class, I discovered. And there's a lot of confusing, race and class intersect, but they're not identical. And there's a lot of, you ask someone a question about class, they answer about race. You ask them again about class, they answer about race. So there's a lot of confusion, murkiness, not misrecognition of the kinds of class advantages you get, even if you're very low income and voluntarily downwardly mobile. You still have all that education. You still have the cultural capital that lets you talk the same dialect as the decision makers, for example, have options and connections. So there is misrecognition, confusion, lack of vocabulary, and sometimes straight-out pretense and posing.
How would seeing social activist groups through a class lens benefit community organizers?
I'm very hopeful that just seeing these differences, I gave some of the simplest examples, like you see that other kinds of groups besides your own serve food, like wow, great idea. We're going to start doing that like next month. I think seeing some of these cherished group processes and ideals and norms, starting to see them as a class taste and a class culture trait might get some class privileged people to ease up in how to put them out in a non-arrogant way, in a more humble way. I think I'm hoping to spread respect that there's good ideas and solutions from every class culture, but of course it tends to be working class and poor people's activist cultures that get most unseen, overlooked, not shared across class. So I'm hoping to raise the awareness, raise the respect, raise the cross-fertilization, and ultimately raise the ability of more U.S. activists to work well together in mixed-class coalitions so that we can build bigger movements and win more social change.
Can you tell us a little bit about the scholars or researchers who've most influenced your book?
Yes, I'd be glad to. So I so appreciate everyone who took Pierre Bourdieu's theories from France and the areas that he mostly looked at of education and the arts and science. The translation of Bourdieu, this is a Bourdieusian analysis, the translation of Bourdieu into the United States. So I had the honor of studying with David Schwartz at Boston University, who studied with Bourdieu and wrote the go-to book for Americans about Bourdieu's theories. Also, Michel Lamont, who talked about working class men and upper middle class men in the U.S., white and black men, and how they drew moral boundaries. That's a very helpful concept to apply to activists because that's some of what's going on. And so her theories are very, very helpful. And everyone who applied it even to other institutions in the U.S. So I do a real pay reverence to Annette Leroux and her Bourdieusian analysis of parenting styles and how kids arrive at school age with a really different set of strengths and socialization, that they've formed a really different class habitus. And of course, the school rewards the professional families' kids' habitus and does not reward the working class kids. I love her theories and Michel Lamont's because they're asset-based. They have, they're not just seeing the working class and poor people's cultures as a bunch of deficits, as is so often the case of how do we do remedial, to get people up to those middle-class values and those middle-class vocabulary and the middle-class skills. I found, as they did, that in fact there are strengths of all class cultures, and which set of strengths gets rewarded and recognized publicly is very, very unequal, but the amount of strength is not unequal. And that just as in schools, Annette Leroux and Shirley Bryce Heath and others, Prudence Carter, others say you could set up schools so that they tap the working class and poor kids' strengths as well. I'm saying something parallel, that we could set up groups and coalitions for social justice in a way that tapped the strengths of activists of all class cultures.
Do you have anything you would like to add?
No, just that I guess I would like to say thank you to the Boston College Sociology Department. I had the idea for this book, and Bill Gamson was my long-term mentor and a professor from previous eras. So saying to him, does this sound like a book? Would this, is this an idea worth going for? And that he was so supportive the whole way. My other committee members, Eve Spengler and Lisa Dodson from the department, and Francesca Paletta from UC Irvine, but also everyone I studied with, Juliet Shore, and everybody who taught me statistics, God bless them. That was an uphill thing, but I feel like the whole department was so supportive of this gleam in my eye of, I think this could be a dissertation, and I think this could be a book, and I think this could make a difference in the world. They just cheered me on and backed me and, gave me this very high level of expertise that I could tap into and get mentored by. So I feel very, very appreciative of the BC Sociology Department.